Attraction is not built on kindness. It is built on tension. I have watched men ruin themselves attempting to be liked. I have watched them offer generosity they could not afford, patience they did not feel, warmth they performed like actors on a stage they did not own. And I have watched, without surprise, as the objects of their devotion turned away, not out of cruelty, but out of something older and more precise than cruelty. They turned away because nothing in that man gave them reason to stay. Nothing uncertain, nothing withheld, nothing worth pursuing. A man who gives everything immediately has declared his position too early. He has shown the full map before the negotiation begins. In all my years of diplomatic service, I never once saw a prince gain advantage by revealing his intentions at the opening of a meeting. The same principle governs the heart. I did not write about love in The Prince. Some find this curious. They ask, did Machiavelli not understand romance? Did he not feel the calculation behind a glance across a room? I understood it entirely. That is precisely why I did not write about it. It requires no special theory. It obeys the same architecture as everything else I observed. In the courts, in the councils, in the alliances that formed and dissolved before the ink had dried on the treaties. Attraction is not a mystery. It is a negotiation conducted without words. And like all negotiations, it rewards those who know how to withhold, when to advance, and when to make the other party believe they are the one pursuing. You think this is cynical. I think this is accurate. There is a difference. I spent 14 years in the service of the Florentine Republic. I sat across from Cesare Borgia. I walked into rooms where the wrong word could end a career, a life. I learned that the person with the most visible need is always at a disadvantage. Not because need is shameful, we all carry need, but because visible need surrenders leverage. It announces to the room that you require something from someone else. And the moment that is announced, the balance shifts. Men do not pursue what pursues them. This is not cruelty, this is the shape of desire. When I returned from a diplomatic mission in 1502, I had spent months watching Cesare Borgia manage the loyalty of men who feared him and the attention of women drawn to him by that same fear. He did not beg. He did not explain himself. He did not soften his edges to become more palatable. He presented himself as a fixed point, immovable, self-contained. He already decided, and he made everyone around him feel that they were the variable, not him. I watched this carefully, not because I admired cruelty. I did not then, I do not now, but because I recognized in it a pattern so old and so consistent that it demanded to be recorded. The pattern is this. Desire moves toward what it cannot fully possess. It orbits the uncertain. It accelerates toward the withheld, and it collapses the moment that pursuit is no longer required. Exile taught me this more personally than any court ever could. When I was stripped of my office in 1513 and sent to Sant'Andrea in Percusina, I had time, more time than I wanted, to observe myself. What I had valued most in my years of service was not the salary. It was the tension, the uncertainty of outcomes, the sense that a precise word, a calculated silence, as a well-timed letter might change the course of what was coming. When it was removed, I felt the loss not as grief but as a kind of dullness. Sitting in that farmhouse, writing by candlelight to men who no longer needed my counsel, I understood that what I had experienced in my career was not so different from what occurs in the interior of a person falling toward another. It is the uncertainty that does it, not the beauty, not the virtue, not the warmth, though warmth has its uses. The uncertainty, the man or woman who has not yet been fully explained, who seems, and this word is important, who seems to have other concerns beyond you, a life that proceeds with or without your presence. That is the beginning of attraction, not the declaration, not the gift, not the elaborate effort, the self-sufficiency. And here is the core law that governs all of this, stated plainly enough that you cannot escape it by misreading. A man who needs your attention more than you need his will never hold yours. Write that down. Look at it on days when you are tempted to send the second message, before the first has been answered. Look at it when you are preparing to offer something, your time, your vulnerability, your visible longing, to someone who has given you no clear signal they have earned it. Desire does not respect generosity. In political life, you can build loyalty through generosity. through favors distributed at the right moment to the right people. But political loyalty and desire are not the same architecture. Loyalty is rational, desire is not, and what governs desire operates below the level of reason. It's in a region of the mind that responds to pattern rather than argument. The pattern it responds to is this: that which requires effort is worth effort. A prince who gives audiences to anyone who asks is stripped of his mystique. His time becomes common. Men do not value what costs them nothing. They say they wish the door were always open. But what they feel when the door is always open is something quieter than gratitude, something closer to disinterest. I know the difference between a duke who kept me waiting and a duke who received me immediately. I trusted the first more. Not because the first was necessarily more capable. Capability and elusiveness are separate attributes, but because the first understood that his attention had to be protected in order to remain valuable. You must apply this principle to yourself. I'm not as performance, not as game playing, but as an honest understanding of how desire behaves in all people. When a man is entirely predictable, when his responses can be anticipated, when his mood is always legible, when his interest is permanent and obvious, he ceases to generate any productive tension in the mind of the person he desires. The mind, left with nothing to solve, turns elsewhere, not because it wishes to leave, but because it is built for problems. It is built to chase incomplete things toward completion. When completion has already been offered, the mind has no task. And a mind with no task becomes restless. I watch this in courts where princes kept mistresses. The ones desired longest maintained, not through calculation but through genuine self-possession, a kind of interior reserve, something that remained, even in intimacy, slightly beyond reach. The princes could not always explain why they were drawn back. They described the surface without identifying the structure beneath. The structure is this: she had not yet been fully solved, and the mind does not rest until it has solved what it has begun to pursue. Now let me translate this into the terms of your world. You live in a time of immediate response. Messages answered within seconds. Availability signaled at every hour. You live in a time where withholding attention has become structurally difficult, where mystery must be cultivated deliberately, because your tools make transparency the default. When you respond immediately to every message, you signal that you were waiting. When you were waiting, you were available. When you were available, your time was not being used. And you have announced, without saying a word, that this person is the most pressing concern in your life at that moment. That may be true. It should never be visible. A prince does not meet every emissary the moment they arrive. The delay communicates that he has other concerns, that his attention is a resource to be allocated, that obtaining it requires adjustment on the part of the person seeking it. Introduce this principle into your personal life, not as cruelty, but as an accurate reflection of the reality you should be living, that you have a life, that it proceeds, that it does not halt at the moment someone interesting enters it. The person who continues living, who does not rearrange their days around an emerging attachment, is automatically more compelling than the person who drops everything. And not because dropping everything is wrong, but because continuing is the stronger signal. Now let us consider approval seeking, because this is where most men damage themselves most severely, and most invisibly. Approval seeking is the single most reliable method for eliminating desire in another person. When a man is attracted to someone and uncertain whether that attraction is returned, the mind generates anxiety. That anxiety pushes toward resolution, and the most available resolution is to seek, through behavior or gesture, a sign that the other person approves. The seeking itself is the problem, because what it communicates is this: I am uncertain of my own value, and I require your confirmation, and no one confirms what they have already lost interest in. The political analogue is precise. When a lesser state sends repeated emissaries to a greater one, begging for acknowledgement and formal recognition, what does the greater state conclude? That the lesser state is afraid. And a state that is afraid has already conceded the negotiating position. Every additional emissary deepens the impression of weakness. The correct strategy is to withdraw, not hostilely, not dramatically, simply to reduce contact, to appear occupied, to behave as though the alliance, while useful, is not essential. The moment a lesser state behaves as though it does not require the alliance, the greater state begins to wonder whether it should be worried about losing it. This is not manipulation. This is leverage. A man who desperately requires a woman's approval will never have her respect. He may have her pity, and he may have a version of her affection, the kind extended to patients, to children, but he will not have her desire, because desire is not activated by need. It is activated by the perception that something valuable might be lost. You cannot threaten loss if you have already handed over everything. Cesare Borgia entered every room as though the room's purpose was to receive him, not to judge him. He looked where he chose to look. He spoke when he chose to speak. He laughed rarely enough that his laughter meant something, and when he gave his attention fully, that person felt it, because attention that is never given freely is, when given, extraordinary. Compare this to the man whose eyes follow the person he desires around a room, announcing his position to everyone present. That man is already defeated. Not because his feeling is wrong, but because he has displayed it before it could be earned. Attraction is not charity. It does not respond to effort the way craftsmanship does. Attraction responds to the impression of a life fully inhabited, to the sense that this person arrived from somewhere real, and will return to somewhere real when the conversation ends. The man who is genuinely occupied, genuinely not in need of the evening's outcome, he is automatically more attractive than the man who has arranged his entire interior around hoping. And here is the cruelest inversion of all. The more you require a particular outcome, the less likely it becomes. When a city-state required an alliance desperately, it destroyed its own negotiating position. The desperation itself created the vulnerability it feared. And the same mechanism operates in attraction. When you require a specific person's approval, when your equilibrium depends entirely on their response, you generate small signals that communicate this dependency. You over-explain. You over-apologize. You retreat too quickly when challenged. You agree too readily when you should push back. You perform a version of yourself calibrated, not to what you actually are, but to what you believe they want. And they sense it. People sense it the way they sense weather before it arrives. Something shifts. The certainty you tried to project reads, at close range, as its opposite. The warmth you offered reads as need. The flexibility you displayed reads as a man with no fixed position. A man with no fixed position has nothing to stand on. Mystery is not concealment for its own sake. And a man who refuses to speak about himself in the hope of appearing deep is not mysterious. He is merely difficult, and difficult is not the same as compelling. True mystery comes from depth, from the sense that there is more to understand than has been revealed, not because they are hiding it, but because it exists, and it is complex, and it will take time to reach. A man who has no inner life and pretends to have one will be found out immediately. The performance cannot sustain scrutiny, and once discovered, it destroys the attraction entirely. But a man with a genuine inner life, who has formed real opinions, developed real capacities, survived real difficulties, that man is automatically mysterious. Not because he withholds, but because what he contains cannot be communicated in an evening. It builds the depth before you seek the attention. Men who attempt to attract before they have anything to offer are like princes who attempt to rule territories they have not yet consolidated. They overextend. They manage the impression without the substance to sustain it. And impressions without substance collapse the moment any real pressure is applied. Now let me describe the trap the kind man consistently falls into, the nice but invisible problem, which destroys more romantic prospects than cruelty ever has. The kind man believes, sincerely, that sustained, consistent, visible goodness will eventually produce love, that if he demonstrates reliably enough his care, his patience, his willingness to sacrifice, she will eventually recognize what she has. He is wrong, not about the goodness. He is wrong about the mechanism. Kindness is not a currency that accumulates toward a purchase. It is a baseline, the expected minimum. A man who points to his kindness as his primary distinguishing quality has announced he has no other distinguishing qualities. Desire does not move toward men because they are kind. Kindness is assumed, required as a precondition. not experienced as a feature. What moves desire is kindness combined with something that produces tension. Confidence, purpose, challenge, the refusal to be infinitely rearranged. A man who is kind without tension has offered comfort without excitement. Comfort produces gratitude. Gratitude produces a specific form of affection. But affection and desire are not the same. Affection is given to those who make your life easier. Desire is reserved for those who make your mind work harder. I'm the kind man who wonders why he is admired but not pursued, has confused two categories that feel adjacent, but operate entirely differently. He has provided warmth, but he has not provided friction. Friction, not cruelty, not coldness, not calculated distance, but genuine, respectful friction. The sense that this person has his own perspective and will not abandon it to please you. A person who disagrees sometimes, not to be difficult, because they actually disagree. A person who will not rearrange their schedule without a clear reason. A person who expresses preferences, maintains standards, and does not negotiate them downward to avoid brief discomfort. That person generates a specific kind of interest. Interest follows from the sense that understanding them will require actual work. The emissaries I respected most maintained their position quietly, without drama, and did not appear to need my agreement to leave the room with their dignity intact. They could walk away. That is what made their presence at the table valuable. Build a life that would continue without her, not because she does not matter, but because a life that requires a specific person to function has conceded too much. No one wants the responsibility of being made necessary against their will. The prince loved only because his subjects have nowhere else to go is not loved at all. He is merely settled for. Be chosen, not because you are the only option, but because you are the best one available. And the best option is never the most desperate one. Now let me speak about curiosity, the active instrument of attraction, in not the passive reduction of availability, but the deliberate production of questions in the mind of the person you wish to draw toward you. Curiosity is not manufactured. It is invited. I wrote letters for 14 years to men who held my future in their hands. A letter that revealed too much too quickly gave the reader no reason to await the next one. The best letters left a door slightly ajar, enough to satisfy the present curiosity while generating a new one. Your history, your wounds, your ambitions, your fears, these are not opening gambits. They are rewards for earned trust. The deeper rooms of a house that should only be entered once the outer rooms have been appreciated. A man who reveals his deepest wound on the first evening has surrendered his most valuable property before the negotiation has established his baseline. Vulnerability, correctly timed, is one of the most powerful tools available, but placed too early, it lands not as intimacy, but as burden. And people do not desire what burdens them. When pursuit becomes obvious, when behavior reshapes itself around the desired person's preferences, two things happen simultaneously. The man loses the version of himself that was attractive, and the person being pursued begins to feel the weight of being pursued. The weight is uncomfortable. Not because being desired is unwanted, but being chased, being the object of visible, unreciprocated pursuit, creates an obligation the pursued person did not ask for. It implies that the pursuer's emotional state has become the pursued person's responsibility. When your emotional state becomes someone else's responsibility, they will manage it by creating distance. A distance is how people protect themselves from responsibility they did not choose. Do not chase. Advance? Yes. Signal interest? Yes. Make your presence felt? Absolutely. But advance with the manner of a man who has other directions available. Signal interest with the restraint of a man comfortable with uncertainty. One invites, the other demands. Desire responds to invitation. It recoils from demand. There are people who will never desire you, not because you are wrong, not because the correct sequence of actions performed over sufficient time would have changed anything, but because desire, like political alliance, has prerequisites that cannot always be manufactured. Cesare Borgia understood this with absolute clarity. There were cities he could take. There were cities he could not because his army was insufficient, but because the conditions made victory Pyrrhic. He did not waste himself on those cities. He noted them. He moved on. You must apply the same calculation. the person who has given you every available signal that their interest will not be returned, has provided you with accurate intelligence. The correct response to accurate intelligence is to adjust your strategy. A man who continues pursuing a clearly closed door is not romantic. He is strategically illiterate. Reality does not negotiate with your preferences. A prince who takes a territory brilliantly and then administers it poorly has accomplished nothing. Attraction established and then carelessly maintained collapses into the same predictability that prevented it from forming. So the most common error made by men who have successfully attracted someone is that they relax and allow the qualities that produce the attraction to atrophy. They become available in ways they were not before. They orient their lives around the relationship rather than continuing to be the person the relationship was built around. Something in the quality of the attention shifts. The person begins to feel, dimly, without naming it, that they are now with someone different from the person they were drawn to. Continue to be yourself, not the version you constructed for the beginning, the genuine version, the one with opinions, ambitions, separate commitments, an inner life that does not require her participation to proceed. That is what she was drawn to. That is what will hold her, not the performance of it, the reality. In any alliance, and political or romantic, the ally you cannot afford to lose is the ally who could survive losing you. They may admire kindness, but they pursue intrigue. I have watched kind men finish last and kind men finish first. The difference was never the kindness. The difference was whether the kindness existed within a man who also had edges. A man who was warm and also had limits. A man who was generous and also, without apology, kept something for himself. The man with no edges is a field with no walls. Anyone may enter. Anyone may leave. Nothing to define it. Nothing to protect. Nothing to pursue. Kindness within a man of substance is a virtue. Kindness as a substitute for substance is an advertisement for someone who has not yet built himself. And no one desires an unbuilt thing. Build yourself first. Not for her. Not for the room. For the same reason, a prince consolidates his home territory before he campaigns outward. Because without that foundation, every outward move exposes a vulnerability that will eventually be exploited. Develop the inner life that does not require external validation to sustain itself. Develop the competencies that make you genuinely occupied. Develop opinions you hold not because they are popular, but because you have actually thought about things. Develop the capacity to be comfortable in uncertainty, to sit with an unknown outcome without requiring it to be resolved immediately. That capacity, the ability to wait without collapsing, is more attractive than any feature, any status, any performance you could mount in a single evening. Because it is rare. Because most people cannot do it. Because the person who can wait without unraveling communicates something extraordinary, that they trust their own worth without requiring the world to confirm it at every hour. Real magnetism comes from the gravitational pull of a person who has become, through effort and honesty and discipline, fully themselves. Be fully yourself. This is not a soft instruction, it is the hardest one I have offered. Most people are partly themselves, partly a reflection of what they believe others want to see. Most have negotiated their identity downward in exchange for approval. Most have compromised something real in order to be liked, without ever receiving the desire they were hoping to purchase. They bought the wrong thing. Approval and desire are not the same currency. Approval is given to the pleasant. Desire is extended to the compelling. I remove the performance. Remove the seeking. Remove the adjustments you have made to your presentation that have no basis in who you actually are. What remains will be the version of you capable of attracting something real. Not by trying, by being. And if what remains is not yet enough, if, looking honestly at what you have built, you recognize gaps between who you are and who you intend to be, do not cover those gaps with performance. Fill them. That is the work that precedes everything else. I learned the permanent difference between chosen and merely tolerated in exile. When I had power, I had company. When I lost it, I learned quickly who had chosen and who had merely arrived, because the door was open. And the ones who remained after 1513, when the Medici returned and I was imprisoned and then cast out, had not been gathered through performance or elaborate generosity. They had been gathered through years of genuine contact, through opinions honestly expressed, through a friendship that had never required me to be other than I was. They were few. They were sufficient. In the end, the number of people who genuinely desire your company, not your performance, not the comfortable arrangement of mutual need, but you, clearly seen and freely chosen, is never large. It has never needed to be. One person who chooses you fully is worth 10 who tolerate you gratefully. Remember this. The crowd may admire you. Let the one who matters pursue you, not because you withheld yourself cruelly, but because you were worth pursuing. Build that. Everything else follows.